Hello everyone, it's a pleasure to join you today. I'm really encouraged and inspired to see the attention that's being given to transparency in supply chains in the garment and footwear industry. This has been an area of kind of concern and passion for me ever since I started modelling as a teenager nearly 20 years ago. And I started to look into the supply chains of different brands I was working with and discovered a lot of really horrifying stories, from farming practices to social kind of labour rights issues, to the plastics industry, to leather, etc. And I've long believed that without transparency, we can't solve any of these issues. And it's been really encouraging to see in recent years the attention that transparency is gaining, the number of startups that are looking at tools for transparency in supply chains, and also that policymakers are exploring this. Because of course transparency is needed for customers too, so that customers can make informed purchasing decisions and we can kind of combat the rising tide of greenwashing that is happening when there's a very kind of opaque landscape around how things are produced. I think you're all probably aware of the huge impact that fashion already has, with a footprint estimated around 10% of the global carbon footprint and around 20% of wastewater. There is around 100 billion pieces of clothing made every single year, 3/4 of which ends up in landfill. And now the majority of the fibers being produced are made from petroleum or plastic based, which is of course continuing the demand for petroleum and also is a cause of microplastic pollution in the oceans. I was shocked to learn recently that if the fashion industry doesn't change trajectory, it's estimated that by 2050, fashion will be using over 1/4 of the global carbon budget to stay within 2 degrees of warming, let alone the 1.5 degrees of warming that we know we need to strive for. So I think fashion has, a really big role to play. And I also think that fashion is an interesting sector to look at because it's more complicated than food in terms of supply chains, but less complicated than, say, electronics. So I think there's a level of complexity that could actually provide a framework for other industries to learn from. And also because fashion has ripple effects on other sectors, because fashion isn't just a noun, it's also a verb. It's a metaphor for how we kind of prioritize our values in society. And so if the fashion industry shows that caring is important, shows that transparency is important, shows that businesses need to take responsibility for solving social and environmental problems rather than causing them, shows that citizens can make informed choices and that can be fashionable and cool, then I think the ripple effects of that transition will affect other industries too. We know all the different goals that have been set by corporations and by countries, net zero being an obvious one. We don't know if we've met those goals. We will not know if we've met those goals if we don't have proper transparency. You cannot solve a problem if you don't know actually what the problem is. And this is not a technical issue. The technology exists for us to know how things are made. I mean, if we have the technology to fly to the moon, for Google to know more about their customers than sometimes their customers know about themselves, then we could actually have the intelligence and the data and the technology to understand supply chains. Arguably, the reason we don't is because of prioritization, lack of political will, lack of corporate will. And I'm really hopeful that the tide is turning on this. And I encourage all of you to be part of that transition. Thank you.